Serving as worship leader at the United Methodist Church's General Conference is a feat that Raymond Trapp is embracing by offering music that both showcases the diversity of the church and also meets people at their point of need. Trapp shares insights into his musical strategy, his self-care routine for the 11-day event, and how he believes the General Conference theme of "And know that I am God" is not to be seen as a command, but rather as a reassurance to the entire denomination. Raymond, welcome to Get Your Spirit in Shape.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here, and it's a pleasure to be here with you, Crystal.
Well, I'm excited for our audience to get to know you in the way that I've gotten to know you over the last few years. You are such a gift to the United Methodist Church. And we're going to talk about your role. You have been selected to serve as the worship leader for General Conference, which is coming up in April of 2024 in Charlotte, North Carolina. Before we talk about that, how you're going to serve in that capacity, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I'm originally from Belize, Central America. I was born in Belize and came up here at a young age, around 7, with my grandmother and my sister and I. My grandmother was very involved in church in Belize, so church has always been a part of our lives. So when we came up here, we naturally first looked for a church home. And we found at that time was actually a Wesleyan Methodist church, a small church, but a great community. And we met some other people from Belize too. So there was a connection there. I think that's where it started there. My grandmother was a composer, so she was the first musician. And I actually learned more about her later in life and her work she did in Belize. So then came up here, became a part of church, and have been with the church ever since. I've been married for 17 years and have 2 beautiful children, Ava and Matthew. And really, I now do full-time ministry. And that's been my focus, and grateful for that.
You do full-time ministry in a church as a worship leader, and you are just doing music. It must feel like 24/7.
Yes, it does. And I'm grateful. And I'm thankful to be doing it in church. I've always felt at home in sacred music, and I play other music too, but there's always something about feeling at home in church. So it's a comfortable environment for me. And I think as I've gotten older, I've moved from performance to ministry, and that has made a big difference in it.
That is such an interesting distinction. And I love that, because that's really what I see your role is at General Conference. You're going to be ministering to the entire General Conference over those days through music. So let's kind of go ahead and talk about that. You were selected in 2018. At that time, you were selected to serve as the worship leader for General Conference, what was to be General Conference 2020, and then also General Conference 2019. You did serve in 2019, and then, as we all know, the pandemic delayed the General Conference 2020 for 4 years, which is coming up in April. So I'd love to hear what you thought the job would be versus what it ended up being when you had that position in 2019 at the special session of General Conference.
I had some idea, because one thing, I reached out to people who had served in that capacity before, and they were definitely Laura, and they were so helpful in sharing their experience and helping in instruction and guiding me. And I was so thankful for that too. So that helped a lot. Of course, there's nothing like when you actually start to do it. I was amazed by the people from so many different parts of the world, and also getting to know them, because some we interacted with more who were playing a part in the various services. And really, it was enlightening, even understanding the structure of the church worldwide. So that was a teaching lesson for me. And definitely, it strengthened the idea of worship and ministering to people, and that we were serving people in that capacity. As we all know, that was a very difficult General Conference. And the purpose of music for me was to establish a time of worship, and worship that met everyone at their point of need. that had to be a place where they can gather in sacredness and feel loved and feel encouraged. And by God's grace, through music, through scripture, through word, we pray that we were able to create that time for everyone.
Yes, that was a difficult general conference, and there were a lot of emotions there. But I do remember being there, and when I heard the music, there was almost a balm that happened in the room. And what's behind that, Raymond? I mean, it felt very spirit led, but tell me how that was coming to you and how you and your musicians were creating that atmosphere.
It was definitely keeping the focus on worship. Because even when you come together as musicians, as singers, people have their views on various things. But it was important for us to understand we were here to lead in worship. And worship had to be about God, our relationships with God. And my point was that there was brokenness in various ways in the room, apart from the general conference. We all come with our own brokenness, our own need for healing. And I think if we focused on meeting that at its point of need, then God could do the rest. Because you do get to a point, you do as much as you can do, and you pray for God to do the rest. And that was the goal there. It had to remain about worship. A friend of mine years ago came up with an acronym for worship, and she said, when our reality seems hard, invoke praise. And that has always stuck with me and been somewhat of a grounding. And so I think that's what helped to create that at that time.
So, not to really dwell on 2019, but it was a shortened, I believe we were there for 5 days, but we're getting ready to be in Charlotte. That general conference is going to be across 2 weeks. The pace is exhausting, long days, worship for sure, but also lots of business meetings. And as you said, people gathering from around the world. Do you have a plan yet? Do you know how you're going to kind of step into that space and keep that time of worship and praise going across that many days?
Yes, I mean, to some degree. We have the same theme that we had, which says, and know that I am God. And really, for this general conference, we gathered and started all the worship services from scratch because life has changed so much for the church, for people, for various organizations. And so we felt the need to start from scratch with that theme. And we gave thought to that theme. And we see it not as a command, but as a reassuring someone that in the darkness, in the fear, know that I am God and know that I am with you, as well as in the joy and in the good moments. And so that we prayed and we talked about that, and that we felt that's where it fell. And so we started now putting together services with that in mind, and also music. How do we support that through? And also, we want the services to be something that people not watch, but engage in and experience. We want songs that they feel encouraged to sing. And I think that's the ministry part of meeting them at their point of need. We don't want to be perfect. We just want to practice excellence in worship.
I loved how the reframing of the thematic verse of this reassurance, because we step into this time really wanting and needing that, remembering
Right.
that who God is and that God is there for us. How are you going to bring in the worldwide connection? What's that going to look like from a worship standpoint?
We had various guest groups that were slated for the last general conference, and life has changed for many of them also. So we're going to be starting from there to see, for one, those who can still participate. And the mere fact of having these artists and musicians and worshipers from around the world brings their own culture and ideas into it. So it's a learning experience for us also. So definitely in the writing of liturgy, incorporating those voices outside of what our normal experience in worship is, and finding God in those spaces too. And so I definitely feel there'll be something for everyone in a sincere way from worship. Because I do feel once God enters the room, the oneness is there no matter where we're coming from. Worship speaks a unique language to everyone. So that is a way of bringing that in and reestablishing some connections that we had. And fortunately, some people we worked with are no longer with us. They've become blessed memories. And so restructuring some of that to make that happen.
Raymond, when you were hired in 2018, Sarah Hotchkiss, who's the business manager of the United Methodist General Conference, said, "His gift in this area reminds me of John Wesley's instructions in select hymns, in which the founder of Methodism exhorts that above all sing spiritually, have an eye to God in every word you sing." How do you keep accomplishing that?
You said it better than I could. I thank her. Hymns are very important to me. I grew up in hymns, and I grew up in a church that only had an organ and a piano. So contemporary gospel music was something I was introduced later. So text is important to me, and always looking at new hymn writers. As I said, I think I say it a lot, but text that meets people at their point of need, text that centers us, text that we can relate to, regardless of where we are. So there's very careful attention paid to text, how it affects us where we are, the melody, and also, although this is sacred music, how we present it through various genres. So one day may have somewhat of a Caribbean feel, a jazz feel, a bluegrass feel, you know? So definitely I spend a lot of time doing that in my church work, but also overall preparing for this. It's a lot of listening, but especially to hymns. Hymns play an important role. They're the foundation of our church. And so they'll be very present at General Conference.
Raymond, it almost feels like you're planning the Olympics of the United Methodist Church with all that's coming together. So, because in addition to the music, there are choirs, there are performances. Do you work to bring those together? Are you part of a team that does that?
Yeah, we had a team that helps to bring that together, but also me being in direct conversation with the directors. So we all have an understanding of where we're headed with the worship, which I think helps a lot. Even back in 2019 when we had guest choirs, I had dinners and conversation with directors where we shared thoughts. So I think that helped to establish the overall vision. And they did an excellent job of doing what they do to speak to that vision of us being together in that space and what the music needed to be for everyone. And that was awesome too. As I said, some of the music was new to me, but it really ministered.
I hear you talk about all the planning, and there's so much planning, years of planning. But we also know in real time, things happen, and you're going to have someone call a break, or they're going to need to go to a session or something. And someone's going to turn to you, or maybe they don't even turn to you, but you just hear what's happening. Do you have some things prepared that they're kind of waiting for those breaks? Or is that something where you're just really feeling the, if you will, the temperature of the room and playing what the Holy Spirit puts on your heart?
Right. I think it's a combination of both, because even in 2019, there were times when we kind of felt the room and made some changes on the spot that worked, you know? I remember the few songs we did, few worship choruses in a Caribbean flavor, and people were just having a great time in that. I also remember, I think it was Bishop Palmer. We were playing a Charles Tinley hymn quietly in the back, and he heard it and mentioned it, and we all broke into "We'll Understand It Better By and By." So I keep like a list of go-tos, but there are also moments when, okay, we should do this now, or something and be requested. And I'm glad they know they can do that with us, that we're ready for that also. Because sometimes the plans change, and I think you need to be open to that.
Tell me about the band that you assemble. I've heard you talk about that before, and it's just this kind of when you were talking about this place of excellence, that's what comes together.
Right, right. I have an assistant music director by the name of Joe Roberts, and he and I have worked together for years. So he's always with me because we just know how we vibe and move. And also a drummer by the name of Jerome Roberts. So that forms the core, and I build the rest of the musicians around that because I also like to use local musicians from the area or even some people who are attending General Conference who I find out are musicians and connect with them. So, and we've run into some amazing talents, guitarists, percussionists all over. So some folks are with us maybe 2 days, 3 days, those who can't do the entire thing. But once we all get there, we connect. And, so many things are done electronically now too, also. But it makes up this core. And I'm always musicians who play well but understand worship because we don't want to play to please ourselves. We want to share our gifts, not show off our gifts. And that's important to me. And we've been able to find musicians who get it. It's about the worship now. We can get together later and gig and talk chords, but play from our heart.
It's like moving from that performance place to that ministry
Correct.
place that you mentioned earlier.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Exactly. And some of them don't necessarily come from a sacred background, but they have a heart of worship. And I think we meet in that space to create it.
I'd like to take a break from our conversation with Raymond Trapp to tell you about a new book from Cokesbury. Have you ever wondered how the resurrection of Jesus changed the lives of his followers and how it can still transform us today? In The Third Day, Living the Resurrection by Tom Berlin, we join Peter, Mary Magdalene, and Thomas as they feel the despair of losing Jesus and the surprise and joy that awaits them in the resurrection. Trace events around these characters along with Paul and the disciples at Emmaus and how the resurrection transforms their lives. As Tom Berlin writes, the third day is the day of the resurrection, the beginning of all of our stories, and the day when hope broke through so many forms of darkness that attempt to cloak our lives. Pick up a copy of The Third Day at Cokesbury.com and consider the difference the resurrection made to those who first experienced the risen Christ and how you will experience that same joy of new life as well. Now let's return to our conversation with Raymond Trapp.
I know it's a little early. We're talking in December of 2023, and this podcast is slated to come out in January, which will still be a few months out. But are there any surprise? Well, I guess if you tell us, they wouldn't be surprises. But are there any highlights that you would want to mention, or should we just be ready for surprises?
I think be ready for surprises. They're coming and they come together in discussions. Stephanie Parsons, who's leading with me and writes liturgy and things of that nature and deal with the worship center. So I think there'll be a few surprises in a few places, pleasant surprises. Yeah.
Raymond, what's your plan to take care of yourself during those days? Do you have a plan yet for how you're going to recharge at the end of every day to be ready for the next?
Yeah, I think in the last few years in my personal ministry, I've started to learn to carve out time for self. And sometimes the self is dinner by myself, usually nothing related to music, but a need to step away and regroup. Sometimes it's just sitting with myself. But those moments I find are necessary to refocus me. And I think also a time to look at what's happening and to hear from God. So I definitely take moments to step aside from everyone. And it usually needs to be outside of the room because once you're in the room, you're involved in what's going on because you care. You can't help but care. But usually dinner with myself has become a meaningful time. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, as we kind of finish up here, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to make sure we mention regarding your role at General Conference, or anything that you've learned that maybe has surprised you?
Not surprised me, but what has been great are the people that I've met. When you meet people who say they're praying for you, or sometimes they share thoughts with you, that has really touched me in many ways. I mean, people who said, I wish you the best, I'm lifting you up in prayer, that's been crucial for me. The camaraderie. What I walked away from 2019 with was just, how do I say it? Not only the people I met, but the bond of caring that I think sometimes we lose sight of because there's so much else going on. Or someone sharing how something touched them. They mentioned you blessed us. And I always want to tell people, you don't know how much you blessed us. Your presence, your words, your participation has been. So looking forward to that.
You know, as I've talked to colleagues through the years, the business part doesn't get remembered in quite the same way as the worship experiences. And people, time and time again, people will say, do you remember when this happened? Do you remember when this choir sang? Do you remember when this, we sang this hymn together? And I think that's surprising, or that was surprising to me, that we gather together as a denomination for, a legislative meeting, but the years later, those pieces aren't necessarily remembered. It's how our heart was touched with the music or with the preaching or something like that. So I hear what you're saying about that bond.
Yeah, and you're right. And I heard a pastor mention too, a time from that same 2019 when it was a particular song. And he mentioned about he hadn't felt the presence of God in such a strong way at General Conference in a while. So you're right. I think even for us on stage, that moment of singing Charles Tinley, we'll understand it better by and by, remains with me, liturgical dance and watching people minister in that, because we're also being ministered to. And you're right. I think people walk away with moments they remember, or moments that remind them of home or how they connected with God in some way.
It really is an opportunity for our connectionalism to shine when we're all together
Right.
like that, I think. And there's no more beautiful way than for us, the voices, to be lifted together, singing a familiar song. And so I really appreciate your heart in creating those spaces for us.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. And like I said, the prayers of everyone to keep us centered. I say when God shows up in a room, there's nothing else you have to do.
Yeah.
Um, so we
Just get out of the way.
just get out of the way. Don't worry about the next chord. It'll be all right.
That's right. It's going to be all right.
Yes.
Yes. I love
So
that.
we just want to open all our hearts to that through music and through worship.
Yeah. I will ask you the question we ask all of our guests on Get Your Spirit in Shape, and you may have answered it in part earlier when I asked you about how you take care of yourself, but how do you keep your own spirit in shape?
A pastor shared with me a while ago, because I think I had it backwards for a while. I used to feel my first ministry was my work in church, my music. I remember him saying, your first ministry is your family. And that changed something for me. It didn't mean the next work wasn't important, but it spoke to the sacredness of my children, my wife, my family, and that being my first ministry. Because when that ministry is in a good place, it strengthens me for what comes next. So at this general conference I did before, sometimes they'll come visit me. And that means a lot. That little time there strengthens me. And him sharing that your family is your first ministry helped me a lot.
Yeah. That's a good reminder too of us just kind of keeping our priorities in the right order, really.
Correct. Yeah. I find myself, before I understood that, saying, oh, but I'm doing God's work. But that's a part of God's work too,
Yes.
Yeah. So I had to learn that. So I think I've gotten better by grace.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Raymond, thank you for being a guest with us today. I know it's such a busy season for you, and I appreciate the work on just behalf of all of us in in the United Methodist Church, the work that you do. And I do just also appreciate how when you're on stage, it is about, as you said, meeting the needs of the people there. And that's evident in the work that you do and the music that you bring. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your ministry and all you do. It's a blessing.
Thank you.
That was Raymond Trapp discussing his role as worship leader at the upcoming General Conference of the United Methodist Church. To learn more, go to umc.org/podcast and look for this episode where you will find helpful links and a transcript of our conversation. If you have questions or comments, feel free to email me at a special email address just for Get Your Spirit in Shape listeners, gysis@umcom.org. If you enjoyed today's episode, we invite you to leave a review on the podcast platform where you listen. As we move into a new year, we thank you so much for being a faithful listener to Get Your Spirit in Shape. Happy New Year to everyone. I'm Crystal Cavanis, and I look forward to the next time that we're together.